Felipe Fuentes. I have the distinction and honor of chairing the Energy and Environment Committee. Mr. Blumenfield is with us, and so is Mr. O'Farrell. Today is April 20th, and we have an exciting agenda, gentlemen, before us today. Mr. Prieto, why don't we go ahead and start with item number 1, please. And as you read that, I'll ask, there's only one card, I think, for that item. That would be Mr. Wayne. Come on up, Wayne. Mr. Prieto?
Certainly. Item number 1 relates to presentation by Department of Water and Power relative to 2015 Power Integrated Resources Plan.
So we have more of these funny little names again, the Power Integrated Resource Plan. I thought all the time was going to be spent on this new reforming the DWP proposition. I thought we weren't going to have any rate hikes.
You could go ahead and keep your comments to item number 1. It deals with the 2015 Power Integrated Resource Plan. The governance item isn't...
But that's what it is. It's the LA Department of Water and Power. You said all over the television, you're not going to let these guys do nothing until they vote on that package of reforms. So you're lying again. You're letting them go on with their business as if there is no integrated package of reforms.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell. You're still off topic, Mr.
It's not.
Spindler. So this will be your first warning, and we'll give you 2 more warnings if you want to take them in this period or in the next couple of speaker cards. But I would remind you that you need to stay on topic.
You're still taking my time up with this unrealistic bullshit where you keep saying I'm not on the topic. Why are you still lying and you're letting them do this when we don't have the reform package?
Okay, so we'll go ahead and invite staff up now to present on item number 1. Mr. Webster, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, I've never heard the IRP described as exciting before, so that's really nice to hear for once after all this time.
Well, case number 6 in particular is my favorite because it's the recommendation, but I want you to talk about the 100% case. That's super exciting.
Absolutely. So I will talk about the 2015 IRP and give a summary of that, but also you'll see that in our integrated resource plan discussion, I'll also address a couple of the motions that you'll be considering later in this meeting, the one on the greenhouse gas emission reductions, because it's built into the integrated resource plan, as well as moving towards 2016 in a discussion of higher levels of renewables and GHG free. So, what I want to highlight here is that you see in this particular integrated resource plan, we're already at 20%, we're working our way to 25% over the course of this year, and this plan gets us to 50%. There's one really significant thing I want to point out, is look at this natural gas at 22% with coal at 40%. So fossil fuels are totaling 62%. But as we integrate and move forward with energy efficiency and renewables, natural gas only goes up to 25%. So we're not trading coal for natural gas, but because we have an integrated approach, that the contribution for natural gas as a bridge fuel remains essentially the same. And we'll talk more about how we might get off natural gas here in the future. And so the transformative elements, you've seen these before. Eliminate coal from our power supply, get to 50% renewable by 2030, achieve 15% energy efficiency, the highest goal in the country for energy efficiency. And it's a goal that we're working diligently towards. We're already 30% there as far as deployment of energy efficiency. Get off once through cooling. We'll talk a little bit about how we've been successful in meeting the deadlines for our power plants. But the new one is electric vehicle expansion and really utilizing electric vehicles to help us not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also improve the local air quality. And we'll talk more about that. And then we've also talked in the past about making sure we're investing in our infrastructure. And so this slide basically, it summarizes how we use energy efficiency, We replace coal with solar, wind, geothermal, some combined cycle plants to help back up those renewables and then help really create a clean fuel for electric vehicles. Now, the IRP, it is not a dust collector, although it's a great doorstop. But the reality of this IRP, and this is really important, is this is our power system strategic plan, and every item in here is actionable. And it sets the course of everything we do so that all divisions are working together on a common goal. And so with that said, let me highlight some of the tremendous successes. So the first I want to highlight is the sale. Always have a backup, that's what we say, is that the sale of Navajo. Is that plant, we signed the agreements last year to close the deal in June of this year. We've had a lot of conditions precedent that we had to clean up. There's only one condition precedent left with one utility. So we expect that to be cleaned up and done over the course of the next couple of weeks. That will clear everything for the sale of Navajo to close on that July 1st date. So we're very excited about that. Scattergood 3. Phenomenal construction project, a lot of activity, a lot of upsets along the way. They were able to compress those schedules and build Scattergood 3 to get off ocean water cooling and hit the target date by the end of last year. Another significant thing about Scattergood 3 is we're starting to deploy new technologies. We have what are called clutches. It separates the gas turbine from the generator. We have 3 of 4 clutches in the United States. Some of them are installed here. And why is that significant? Because now we can improve the reliability and not burn natural gas. So we can disconnect the generator, it can run, stabilize the voltage, and not burn natural gas. We've never been able to do that before. So that's a significant technological improvement that we're making while we're getting off ocean water cooling. And the Barren Ridge Transmission Project is going according to schedule. This is really important because it helps us tie in about 860 megawatts of solar, which we're going to have in place either at the end of this year or early next year. And so with the transmission upgrades, all the solar coming together, this is how we're going to get to 25% and actually above that at the end of this year. So IPP, we talked about Navajo. You see that going away right there. IPP gets transitioned to a new type of resource. Last time we talked, we were in the stages of trying to get those contracts completed. Every participant, all 36 participants have signed the agreements now. So the contract to repower IPP is done. So with that contract being completed, now the renewal offer is out. And this gives the participants, all 36, do they want to increase their participation, decrease their participation, or not participate at all? So that is progressing over the next couple of months, and we'll know who the participants are. We've also established a technical committee to look at different types of repowering ideas. So we are organized, we're meeting on a regular basis, we're fleshing out ideas, we're evaluating those ideas, and try to get to a mutual goal on what type of repowering we're going to have at IPP. So this work with all the engineering and conceptual drawings and things like that will take about a year to get done, but we're actively in that process. And so that is going to be great news as we get that finalized. The other item I wanted to point out is demand response, DR. It's always been a significant part of our integrated resource plan because the best generation is the generation you never do at all. And so if we can avoid building capacity and use our customers that are willing to curtail their air conditioning or some processes and help the system, and they can benefit financially, that makes a lot of sense. But you see a pretty soft start, pretty slow ramp up right here. But with the Aliso Canyon issues that we're dealing with, we're trying to figure out how to get a much faster start and ramp demand response much more aggressively. So staff is working very hard to figure out how we can move quicker on that so we have the lift much higher in the beginning stages, and then it may level out over the course of time. I think this is probably one of the most significant slides in the entire slide deck. The reason is that our current resource mix produces a carbon intensity of a little 1,100 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. But as we work to clean our generation, we're going to drive that down to a little over 500, 600 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. But as you look at passenger vehicles, they produce in the neighborhood of 2,400 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. So if we can electrify those resources, this is the savings in GHG emissions as we put in chargers. We charge these electric vehicles throughout the city, whether at homes, at public charging sites, or through businesses, through their fleets. And so if we could focus on this, this helps us get to very significant greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so if you look at the recommended case, which is case number 6, is 50% RPS, changing out IPP by 2025, high electrification, high local solar. You see this orange line, which gets us to about a 60% reduction in GHG emissions by 2035. So that's a significant step forward. However, the dotted line, and I know it's hard to see, but this is the dotted orange line, that if we can get credit for charging electric vehicles, then we get nearly to an 80% reduction by 2035. And we don't know where new technologies will take us and how we might get even below 80%. But it's going to be important for us as we charge these electric vehicles, the burden's not shifted to the utility, but we actually benefit and are incentivized to get these charging stations in place and to charge these vehicles. And so this is how we're addressing a significant part of getting to 80% reduction. So there's a combination of getting off coal, electrification, as well as getting off coal, electrification, and the last one is energy efficiency is really significant to get there. So a big investment this year in our research program was how to reliably integrate 50% renewable energy. Now, this is a year-long study. It cost us $500,000, and I'm going to try to summarize it in this one slide. Now, this slide right here is probably a slide only a chief nerd could really get and understand. So let me try to explain why this is so important. Is that, can we get to 50%? This says absolutely we can get to 50%, and we can do it reliably. Now, the blue line right here is after you start ramping in all of your solar, your loads up here, you're ramping all your solar, we get to the point where this is the minimum we can go. There's nowhere else to put the solar. So what we need to do is plan a system that can absorb these electrons and save them for later. And in our plan in 2015, you'll see that we have electrification that we're pursuing with battery storage. We also have our Castake power plant, which is a storage facility. So we'll be able to absorb these electrons and not let those go to waste. Second thing, this ramp is significant. So as that solar comes off, everything else has to ramp just as fast to keep up with the load. So we're going to need to do this nearly every single day. And we can do that, and so part of this study was to figure out what type of technology we need. We need flexible generation, very fast-moving gas units right now as we use that as a bridge fuel. We can also start doing some load shifting by moving loads so that we start to stretch this ramp out to the greatest extent possible. We really need a balanced renewable portfolio. If it was all solar, this would be much worse. But because we're looking at wind and solar and geothermal and ramping up our geothermal, it will help this ramp tremendously. Also, if we target our energy efficiency programs during these times of day, that will also help. So our sustainability group is looking at how best to deploy energy efficiency to help that. And I think the last point I'd like to make here is this volatility is pretty significant. And we're going to need different technologies to keep up with that second-by-second change. So if solar drops 1 second, I've got to ramp something else that second to match equally. And you can see we're starting to get some bandwidth around that volatility. And as we do that, that helps us deploy what types of regulation devices do we need, what types of batteries and control systems on batteries will help us meet that tremendous volatility. And so those are the 4 things that really we focused on, and we've designed this IRP to handle that level of integration. And so let me move then to 2016, because 2016 has already started. And it is a year-long process to get us to the end of the year. So while 2015 we updated assumptions, we did a lot of research and deployed new technologies to make our modeling tools better, 2016 is going to start with an advisory committee made up of several stakeholders. And this is just a draft, it's not a final, but not only do we have power system experts, but we're going to have council representatives as part of our advisory committee, mayoral office representatives, neighborhood council representatives, the environmental community, but we also want some of our major customers, and we also want some of our customers that are part of disadvantaged communities. They don't have the same level of resources to start getting a better understanding of the IRP and participate more actively. So that's going to be an important change. We have the business community, academia, and we're also looking at maybe bringing technology providers in, because a lot of what we're doing as we look at 2016 and really think about pushing the limits, we really need to understand where the technology is at today, where it's going, how we see technology cost improving. Are we going to start to see battery storage technologies reducing costs rapidly and going through that bathtub curve as far as reliability as well as costs? And so what I wanted to do here is really inform how we might move forward in 2016. Councilman, you mentioned 100%. And for the last month, I've been talking about the moonshot, which you've talked about yesterday. So I don't know where you heard that phrase, but it's exactly what we're trying to do, is the moonshot. And I mean that in a most positive way. Back in the 60s, is that first we have to define the goal. And in the moonshot, it was put a man on the moon and bring them home and do it unharmed. So what we need to do this year is really define what that goal is. Is it 100% RPS? Is it to be GHG neutral? Is it some combination? But we need to dial on what the goal is, and then we need to start framing the big building blocks to get there and what those are and defining those. You know, we've been kicking around ideas, because this is fun things for engineers to do, is what if you eliminated all of our in-basin power plants and put batteries in? And so we did that. We said, okay, we could do that. It would take 500 football fields in the southern part of Los Angeles to make that a reality. Not realistic, but we have to go through that brainstorming, get every idea on the table, and then flush out things that might be problematic. And crazy ideas will prove to be great ideas. Great ideas we think today will be crazy ideas of the future, because technology will develop. So the idea is, as we start to frame these large areas and identify technological gaps, it'll form track number 2, which is happening in parallel. And so this helps us start to identify the research and development that we need to start investing in. And we've already started investing in how do we get there. We talked about the renewable study, that was the $500,000. The MDREPS, engineers love acronyms, but it's our distribution level, is what is the impact of renewables at the distribution level and the volatility it creates on the voltage. And so that study is progressing. We're looking at storage and putting $500,000 in storage development. We're also trying to leverage our fund in collaborative fashions. So working on smart grid with UCLA and USC, Harvey Mudd, we've been working with them on some PV panel foundations and some testing. Stanford has been doing some research as well on 100% renewables, and we've been participating in that. And of course, the Electric Power Research Institute we are collaborating in, and we'll probably see a lot of additional investment in that area to develop these technologies. And as technologies develop, you come back and it informs track 1. What changes do we need to make? How do we modify? And so over the course of working both tracks, over the course of the next several years, we'll get from a conceptual moonshot sort of plan to something that's truly actionable, and you can truly set the engineers on course to achieve the goal and get something into the IRP that's actionable so that we can get there. But it will take some time, and that whole challenge and discussion starts in 2016. And so as we move through, we hope to get the advisory committee started here in May, might be early June, but there's a lot of work to do over the next 6 or 7 months so that we can get an approved IRP by the end of the year. And so that concludes my remarks, and I'd be happy to address your questions, your issues, and comments.
So I've got a couple, but before I sort of jump into them, spend a little time talking to us about sort of integration. I think Appendix J did a good job of speaking to the needs that we are going to have as we contemplate 50% or more. And I think it's a really interesting sort of area. I think historically we look at things as generation, and we set goals based on generation and procurement, 50%, 33%, 20% before that. And it seems like we've won when we do that and pass it, but it's so much more complicated than that. Balancing and integrating that level of renewable energy is not impossible. It just becomes, I think, an engineering exercise that's really complicated as you sort of sift through Appendix J, but from the ratepayer perspective, very costly. And so I'm concerned about how it is that we actually balance all of this. And to me, it's really interesting because it really is, integration really is generation and distribution, but in a very compartmentalized conversation when you're talking about distribution and generation and sort of the historic sort of ways that we've talked about it. What do we know about getting to 50% now with SB 350? I know that you had a study done, and Castaic more than ever is an important resource as we're sort of ramping up and ramping down, but it almost begs the need for more natural gas-fired, very quick ramp-up generation systems in order to balance and integrate what it is that we have to accomplish by mandate. Tell us a little bit about how we get there.
Okay, so I'll summarize the integration first, and then I'll talk some very specific about some of the projects that we're doing. So it is a balancing act, and that's why when we looked at once through cooling and thought about, well, we need to get off of ocean water cooling, how do we do that in such a way that we can also integrate renewables at the same time? And this is why we started to see projects with combustion turbines which can turn off and be fully ramped up to full power in 10 minutes. So that was part of the strategy. We put in combined cycle that also are relatively quick ramping, and future technologies of combined cycle will also be able to ramp quickly up and down. But we're also looking at how Castaic's used, and historically Castaic has been used as buy cheap energy at night and pump it at night and then generate during the day during the peak hours. The whole model of how Castaic is being utilized is shifted. Now Castaic becomes a regulation device to provide that second by second ramping up and down. It also becomes a device to absorb some of those electrons that we see. But that's not the end of the story, because Castaic is one resource, and we don't want to be committed to only one resource that can do that, and then that's why we're developing some of the battery storage technologies. So our plan is to get to over 150 megawatts of batteries to supplement that, but it's batteries with the right control systems, because not all batteries are equal, and it's the controls that make them serve different product categories. Is it to store the electrons, or is it really to provide that fast ramping up and down? And how did they do that? That's important. We're also looking at compressed air storage up at IPP. They have tremendous salt, hard rock salt under the IPP site, which we can create caverns and compress air and bring that back up when we need it. So it can also be a regulation resource. So we're in the studies of that as part of the entire IPP plan I was trying to describe. So that's all on the generation side. But then there's the customer side, is how do we also deploy demand response programs? We can also provide some of that, or microgrid type concepts, so that customers can actually help with some of the grid stability issues. So that all works together, customer programs and generation programs. But all of it is going to be necessary to be balanced from a cost perspective. And what you see in the plan is we've highlighted the cost to get there. So the first 5 years of this plan is dead on what the recent rate approval has been. So we're dead on that track. And as we develop future goals, and if it becomes something different than 50%, if technology changes, we will update those costs and be able to communicate that annually to you.
Mike, can you scroll back to the one deck where you've got the pie charts where you've got natural gas at 22% today, and there we go. That to me is a really fascinating graph because it tells you, it underscores the point that natural gas it really is a bridge technology in the way it is that the department is thinking. And it may be, it's my sense, that we're probably going to have to procure some fast gas ramp technology to get to the 50%, because even though we're in the experimental stages with batteries and the air storage and Castaic, we're not going to get any more hydro online to store or balance in this case. You know, chances are we're going to have conversations about more procurement of gas resources, but this is a slide that we shouldn't forget, because it tells you that we're not growing 3%. I mean, you could probably sort of keep it at 22, but it truly is a bridge strategy, and I think that is really welcome news. There was an element here in the report that did have me a little concerned. It looks like last year we relied on coal for 40% of our generation, and it attributes it to some sort of rounding error. Coal generation more so this year than the year before. Can you explain a little bit about sort of what happened there?
I'm going to have to ask the question about if coal actually did increase.
It increased by just a little bit. You know what, we'll go to questions and I'll find it for you, because that sort of threw me for a loop.
Yeah, because I will tell you, I know for sure that coal production is far off than it was last year. And the reason is, as we factor in the cost of greenhouse gas emissions and really the reduced cost of natural gas, we're finding that our cleanest natural gas units are ramping before coal units.
Yeah. If you go to the executive summary in either binder, page ES13, it says that during calendar year 2015, 40% of the energy delivered to DWP customers was generated from 2 coal-fired generating stations, IPP and Navajo, and that somewhere further down it tells you that we did less the previous year. And I'm just wondering, take some time, maybe staff can chew on that a little bit, understand why we were so much higher than we were the previous year.
So James,
it's not that much higher, but it's
James,
higher than the previous year. Come up to the mic here. Because, I mean, the good news is we're getting out of these contracts. The bad news is that last year it seems that we spent a little bit more in generation from coal.
Every year
This is James Barner, who is our chief analyst of the Integrated Resource Plan.
the Energy Control Center dispatches coal relative to gas, depending on the price of gas versus coal. So sometimes there might be more gas burn or more coal burn, depending on what the price is. We're trying to optimize that. There might be a rounding difference going from 39.4%. We would call it 39%, or 39.6% might be 40%.
No, and so I would have accepted that, but I thought that we did a lot less in the sort of the mid-30s, low 30s generation last year.
I think the year before that, we did have a major outage on IPP.
Okay, so maybe okay, so it's sort of
have
on par with what it is that we've generated.
Yeah, there was that 1 year, and that was out for, what, nearly 6 months?
Okay, so maybe that's what it was, why the number looked different to me. Okay, all right, very good. Thank you for the explanation. I've got more questions, but colleagues, let's go ahead. Mr. Blumenfield?
Question, I'm trying to square page 6 with page 7. And in particular, page 7 is the page about the moving to electric vehicles, which I'm very excited about, and the energy savings we get from that. And page 6 is sort of the big picture of our what types of fuels we're going to be using in the future. But they're clearly linked. So is page 6 assuming everything in page 7?
So that's exactly right. Page 6 assumes the high electrification. I'm sorry, case 6 was the medium electrification case. Is that right? Medium electrification case? It's a high electrification. So we've assumed high electrification, which is a high penetration of electric vehicles. And so the loading that you see that the generation has to match is built into slide 6. It's already there.
Great. And the other piece, I'm trying to understand sort of the dynamic modeling here. Like how does that switch impact our overall use? Because obviously we're saving a lot of greenhouse gases by taking cars off the road, not cars off the road, but taking the fuel that they use out of our air. But that means we're requiring more energy production at DWP. And so is all of that additional production where we see the renewable? Is it sort of a one-for-one swap? Or what would it look like if we didn't have that?
And so I think if you look at page 37 of the executive summary, it shows the overall loading. And let's see, James, do you know if there's a slide in here that shows the change in load with electrification? Is it an executive summary or is it in the main body? And James, you may want to just come up here.
Or just even give me a sense of scale. Like when we do move to that electrification, how much more load does that create for the system?
By 2030, we expect about, I would say, a little less than 10% load growth. So it would be about 2,300 gigawatt hours. We're today about 23,000 gigawatt hours is our total load.
That 10% is the total load growth. How much of that total load growth is attributed to the electric vehicles, and how much is just population, everything else growth?
Well, that would be just the electric vehicles, the 2,300. Now, today we're about 23,000. We'll be growing to probably somewhere around 25,000 by 2030 because of load growth, just natural load
Just
growth.
population load.
Right.
So we're going to go from 23 now to in 2030, 25 or something like that.
Yeah, I could look up the numbers, but
Just
Yeah,
get
it's page 62 of the main body of the Integrated Resource Plan. We show plug-in electric vehicle growth going up, and this is in gigawatt hours, to just over 1,600 gigawatt hours annually. And so you can see the tremendous growth. And this is CEC data, and this is what we've modeled for our territory.
And I imagine that's, in terms of the stability, electric vehicles would provide more of a stable energy pool because you'd be pulling at night mostly.
Well, electric vehicles actually provide more opportunity for how customers can use energy. So, for example, we may get to the point where the technology will allow us, when we're long, have extra solar energy. We could put the call out and say, charge your vehicles during the peak hours because we'd like you to absorb those electrons and we're going to give you a discount on charging. So we get to the point where they can be more flexible as far as when they charge. It may be at night, it may be during the day, and they may be willing to actually allow some of those batteries to be used for the benefit of the local grid if they have plenty of time to recharge. They may want to get those payments.
Portable storage, you could set your rate of when you want to, it's like a market. At what point when the price goes down do you want to start getting
That's exactly right.
car charged, et cetera, which is really exciting stuff. I remember reading what seemed like science fiction stuff a couple of years ago about this very idea. Similarly, on the battery or portable storage issue, you've got your electric vehicles, but now you have this whole new industry, the Tesla battery, just reading about. I wanted to get one of those, but they're not quite ready yet. And other batteries that you can attach to your house, which is essentially distributive energy storage. I was curious how that compares. We always have the tension between, distributive solar and large-scale solar, which is much cheaper to produce, but distributive has other benefits. I imagine there's a similarity in dynamic with energy storage, distributive energy storage versus large-scale energy storage like Castaic and others where you're able to store. Is that true, or is it a different dynamic with, is there an advantage to distributive storage?
There's clearly a benefit to distributed storage. You really need both. You need the utility scale storage working with the local storage. And local storage has that benefit of supporting the grid in certain areas. And that's why we're doing that $500,000 distributed generation study to figure out parts of our grid that could really benefit with these types of technologies and what those impacts are. And we're hoping to get that wrapped up before the 2016 IRP is out. And I also want to mention that our new rate structure actually incentivizes the use of batteries, because as we instituted the power access charge, it really sends that signal that says, if I can reduce that charge by taking some of my solar and saving that for later hours, so I don't have a big surge when my solar comes off, it actually provides that economic incentive for customers to figure out how to put in that local storage in their garages to offset that.
If they have solar. But theoretically, even if you don't live in a solar environment, you know, Tesla batteries are they're starting to go commercial this summer, right? And then hopefully there'll be a lot of other ones. There may be a situation in less than a year where you would buy a battery just to store energy when it's cheap and use it when it's expensive, and in some way connect to this bigger issue of balance. I don't know how much of that is science fiction and how much of that is built into this plan.
And so in this plan, we also talk about the importance of rate design that really incentivize customers to do the right thing. And as we start to get to the point where we can deploy a smart grid type technology so that customers can have real-time pricing so that they see those signals, so that I will charge my battery now because it is a low price time and I see where prices might go during the peak hours so I can withdraw from that. That is exactly what we need to do as technology develops. But part of that is getting our smart grid in place and going through and getting the technologies so that we can do it effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this presentation, and thank you for condensing this into this report. Very helpful. Back to the energy transformation chart that Mr. Fuentes, it's still on the screen. Can you talk a little bit about just the renewable portfolio in 2014? Right there.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to jump to the appendix because I think we have a slide in here. Okay, so I'll talk about it. We do have a slide that really shows our renewables program over the course of time. So today, we have about 1,000 megawatts of wind. And that is the bulk of the renewables that we have in our portfolio. We started up a 250 megawatt solar plant last year, and that is contributing significantly now. And this is the big year for solar, because what we did, instead of rushing into solar when solar prices were $120 a megawatt hour, we hung back a little bit. And as solar prices dropped, we started to layer in project after project after project. So we went, to 90 to 80 to 70 to 60 to $50. And future projects will be $40. And I've been hearing it's possible we could see $30. So by layering those in, this is why we have such a large ramp this year in solar, and we're going to have over 800 megawatts coming online. And we have additional contracts that are being negotiated right now for future year development of solar. And then we have some geothermal. So we have a few, let's see here, approximately 60 to 70 megawatts of geothermal. I'm glad you're shaking your head. My memory is going. But we have that in place, and we've signed an agreement for another geothermal contract that you'll be seeing very, very soon. And then we have some proposals for geothermal pathway where they could build 25 megawatt blocks and maybe get us another 150 megawatts, which will tie into the Utah area, and we can bring it down the IPP line as we reconfigure that entire generation block up there to bring in all kinds of renewables. And so that's the portfolio we're trying to build, is that balance between geothermal, which I don't have integration issues, solar, where I have ramping issues, and wind, which just sort of has a lot of the volatility issues. And by doing all of that together, it helps me get a more stable renewable supply.
So it sounds like by the time we get to the 50% renewable in 2030, solar will be playing a much larger role than it is now within that overall percentage.
Yeah,
With the way things are headed.
And it's in the executive summary on page 37, and I'll just hold it up, is that you can see our wind is in the dark green here, and it represents it's going to be about a third. We'll see a little bit greater than a third in solar, and then new geothermal will be a little bit less than that. So that's how we're trying to achieve that balance. And then we have room for generic RPS. Well, what is it going to be? What is the technology of the future? Is it wave technology? Is it some other technology that we can make use of?
Terrific. Thank you.
You know, just on the renewable piece, I think that I read in here, though, that if, with the integration, some of the challenges that we're going to have, there is the potential for load shedding or curtailment. Can you spend a little time on sort of what it is that we have to do to make sure that that isn't a strategy or a consequence as we integrate?
Well, we never have a strategy to shed load, and this is why we want to build the most flexible generation we possibly can. And so with flexible generation, we also need real-time monitoring of solar output, wind output, which really gets to the ability to predict weather and seeing trends. And there's a lot of technology starting to develop so we can monitor cloud movement, so we can see clouds starting to move over in a trajectory that might move over our solar panels. With any early warning, with a flexible system, I can start adjusting things to avoid the potential for curtailments. Now, if the solar is so extreme and so volatile because we have a monsoon type of situation and lots of clouds, we're going to protect the system. So we have the ability to back off that solar so that our other technologies can come in and make up that difference. And that's a strategy we will deploy. We have not had to deploy that strategy yet, but as we get more solar, we're very ready to deploy that to make sure the system stays stable.
Great. Mr. Kretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for all the great work on this. I join my colleagues in appreciating that. I understand DWP is in the process of repowering in basin, and that's great. But I'm a little bit concerned about the natural gas piece of that. Certainly what we saw in Aliso Canyon points out the need for fuel diversity. And I'm fearful that if we build new gas plants that we're jeopardizing reliability and climate safety. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
So we talked about gas as being a bridge fuel, and as we look at getting to greenhouse gas emission neutral, we have to develop the technology so that we can use renewables and storage. But it's going to take some time to get there. Now, specifically about gas in Southern California is that, one, by using those clutches at these new repowered projects, we don't have to put the demand on gas here in Southern California. And also, we can diversify where our gas supplies come from to increase our reliability. So by having a facility in Nevada, that certainly helps our reliability in that case. And also, as we look at repowering up in Utah and moving from coal to another quick start natural gas to help build a renewable energy park in that area, is that that's also a different natural gas resource, which will help diversify some of the risk. But that's what's so important about us thinking about how do we get to a GHG neutral environment down the road. And that's why the technology and research and development is so critical. And we have to start the conversation so over the course of time, future IRPs will start to hone in on what the costs are associated and what the possibilities are to get us there.
So if we are able to achieve it more quickly, you don't think we'll continue to use those gas plants just because we have them and they can last for a longer period of time?
Well, I think it's really a policy call on when we know what the costs are and what's actually achievable, and as we build towards that, how we're going to deploy that. And we may find that if it's cost effective and is supported by policy, that there's not going to be as much need to have a natural gas facility.
Yeah, I'm just concerned we wind up with stranded costs, and that drives us to use natural gas afterward, a point where we really don't want to be doing that.
And that's why it's so important for us to start the dialogue and start driving the technologies and driving the markets to where we can get there.
I also have one other concern. How much are we doing in terms of building future plants along the coast? Because there are certainly some notable climate scientists that believe by 2050 the coastal part of Los Angeles may well be underwater. So I wonder if we're looking at that and taking that into account.
And so, again, as a bridge fuel that maybe lasts over the course of this 20-year IRP or maybe 25-year IRP, as we move towards where we don't need natural gas, we won't have that issue. So we're not building more plants on the coast, and the repowering of the plants that we are doing, again, is because that's where the technology is today, but 25 years, that's the life of some of these combined cycle units, and they'll be ready to be replaced anyway at that time.
Very good. So Mike, talk to me a little bit about the local solar program. One of the challenges that I had with SB 350 is that we don't get enough credit, or specifically renewable energy credits, for some of those buckets. I know that the goal now is 800 megawatts, 450 of feed-in tariff, 310 of customer net metered solar, and 40 megawatts of community solar. Tell me where we get renewable energy credits now under the SB 350 regime.
And so we generate renewable energy credits through any renewable resources that is approved by the California Energy Commission that is directly connected to our system. So it can't be behind the meter. It has to be connected to us, and that's why a community solar concept that connects directly to our grid, we can take that energy and redistribute to everybody else, and we get to count that.
So we'll get that.
We will get that.
So that's only 40 megawatts.
Right, and the feed-in tariff type program is directly connected to our grid, as well as the utility scale solar is obviously connected to our grid.
Right, but the net metered stuff we're not going to get credit for.
That is correct.
Okay, so the goal right now, is to me seems pretty lopsided, because I think that we want to make sure that communities like the one that I represent get to share in the solar sort of world. The IRP calls for 40 megawatts. What is the status of that? I know we've been working and waiting to hear what the local solar program is going to look like. Any sort of sneak peek as to what we can expect, how residents or ratepayers can buy into the system so that they can enjoy some of the benefits? How's it coming along?
So we expect to have workshops this summer to talk more about that, but you're going to see two programs. You're going to see a rooftop program that would allow us to go into disadvantaged communities, and as we're deploying our energy efficiency programs with our direct install, we can install solar at the very same time connected to our grid so that we get credit for that and give a direct benefit to those customers. So that's one program that we're working on right now. We're testing those costs. We're trying to figure out what does it cost, how do we deploy that, can we do it cost effectively. We're also then looking at the rate challenges on how do we build for a larger roofless program where solar is built, whether it's in basin. Some customers have said out of basin is fine with us, but how do we charge for that? How do we allocate that? How do we charge for it? How do we not violate Prop 26 issues? So there's a lot of legal and financial and really IT work that's going around that, and we're hoping to talk about that also this summer and maybe deploy sometime later this year with some pilots on that.
Got it. So last year, I think, was the first year that the IRP spoke to the human capital component of the system, which I think was a really good sign. And I forget the number. I think 32% thereabouts of the workforce is available to retire. And the IRP also points out that that's a real vulnerability in the enterprise that is DWP. So what are we doing to make sure that we're adequately staffed? When I've done the research, It's actually very interesting. 15 years ago, same situation at DWP. About 30% of the folks were eligible to retire. It doesn't seem that we're doing much better today in terms of that being a vulnerability to the system. So what is it that we're doing? How are we fortifying the personnel functions, making sure that we're doing the warm transfer of intelligence and experience so that we have the best service?
Well, we've turned the corner on that, and it, with your approval of the rates, allows us now to really go out and hire based on the integrated human resource plan. Just in engineering alone, we have over 100 positions that we're going to be interviewing for to bring in so that we can start staffing up. We're also doing the same thing on the labor side, is to bring people in who's going to do the reliability work and train the linemen of the future. And so that hiring is happening now that we have the support to do that. But what we're also doing is really building a training center, because we recognize that some of these employees, they're still going to retire. So how do we capture the knowledge? So we have started to videotape some of the skills on the labor side. How do you do certain things? They really have an expertise. And so we're videotaping those. We've built an intranet type web portal so that employees can look and pull up that video and actually see how to do certain pieces of work that had been done by someone that had worked here for 35 or 40 years. We're also doing that on the engineering side, starting to videotape some of our professionals as far as, you know, what key knowledges do they have that they can share with the new engineering staff. So all of that is happening, so we're turning the corner. We're not there yet, but as we start to get these people in and get them trained and get them taking over, and we do it consistently, that is absolutely key. 15 years ago, there was a lot of hiring, and then it stopped. And nothing for 15 years, and this is what creates the problem. We have to be consistently hiring, consistently training, and make that part of our culture so that we always have staff that can fill into those other positions that are being vacated with the retirees.
You know, the IRP is such a, you know, I said exciting at the outset of this meeting. It's such an important tool that informs really, at least on the power side of things, the budgeting and the sort of policy direction of the utility. And so it's great that you're doing it on a yearly basis. I think it's very good that there's an advisory component to it to sort of test it against assumptions out there with policymakers and stakeholders. Talk to us a little bit about how the process moves from here. I mean, does your board approve it? You're here more of a courtesy than you are a requirement. Help us understand how the IRP works its way through the system.
And so the IRP is a technical document, and so it's an engineering tool that we use to drive the entire power system. And we need to make sure it stays that way. But by having the stakeholder process and vetting it with the community, we'll start to develop different cases, and we'll do model runs. And then James's folks will take it to the community and test those cases and get feedback, and so we can refine until we get to the end of the year. But it's important for us to get to a signed document at the end of the year so we can drive the power system. And so this is a document that's signed by myself and Marcy as our general manager because it's an internal document that drives our actions. Now, as you think about the future, we also have SB 350. And SB 350 is going to require the CEC to start looking at our integrated resource plan, and they're trying to develop those rules. So there may be a process where part of our plan that meets the needs of the CEC will get carved out, and how do we submit that? And so those rules are to be discussed, and we'll find out if it will require a board-approved package or if the general manager can submit that, but that is something that's coming down the road.
So that's sort of where I wanted to get to, because I think as we're contemplating sort of how it is that we improve the processes at the utility, we're going to have to keep an eye on that new mandate on the utility. But today, you don't, for your approval process, do you need board ratification of the document?
We do not.
Informational, right?
It is for information, that is correct.
Now, how does that compare to other sort of municipal utility districts? I think that Pasadena Water and Power, their full council has to adopt the IRP. Any sort of sense as to how we do it versus anybody else?
Well, I think you see that there are utilities that do it the way we do it, making it an engineering document. There's others that take it to their board, and there are others that take it to their councils. But when we started this more formal process in 2010, we made a decision that it was a process that was for the technical folks to sign as long as we had significant amount of input by policymakers. So part of these types of discussions are very helpful because it helps guide the policy and what we need to address in that integrated resource plan as we move forward.
Got it. Very good. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. You just helped me with the close there. There's no action on this item because it really is more informational than anything else. So thank you for the presentation and for the good work on the IRP.
All right, thank you.
So with that, Mr. Prieto, let's go to item number 2, please.
Certainly. Item number 2. Motion Fuentes Bloomfield relative to the formation of a committee on cooling and urban heat impacts and related matters. Mr. Chair, you have 3 people to present on this matter.
Very good. With that, we're going to start with a presentation, I believe, by tree people. Deborah Bloom, come on up. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, council members. Thank you, Councilmember Fuentes in particular, for inviting me. My name is Deborah Bloom. I'm the Senior Director of Policy at Tree People. The reason I'm here today is to tell you about some lessons that Tree People has learned in our research with Australia and how they got through their millennium drought. And this particular presentation is going to focus on how they are dealing with the extreme heat and dealing with cooling in the region. So you might be wondering why I'm here in particular to talk to you about Australia. Well, Tree People has been leading and facilitating an information exchange focusing on technologies, innovations, and policies between our 2 countries since 2012. And we found that the 2 regions share many climatic, demographic, and socioeconomic characteristics, lending themselves to a really meaningful exchange of best practices. And what we found is that Los Angeles and actually all of California can benefit from the lessons that we learned in Australia, both from their experiences with drought as well as with extreme heat. And it's important to know that they didn't actually get everything right. So we're actually able to glean, from hindsight, learn from what they didn't do well. So we believe that LA can adopt and adapt to the most fitting solutions to fit our needs. So given the importance of the lessons learned, Tree People and the Energy Coalition, we actually co-led a delegation to Australia, to the cities of Melbourne and Adelaide. This included local, state, and federal policymakers, including here from the city level, Councilman Fuentes. I see Nancy Sutley here from DWP, and Tracy Minimides from LA Sanitation. We learned many key lessons in Australia, but let me just focus on cooling our cities. As predicted by climatologists, drought was accompanied by severe heat in Australia. In fact, urban temperatures sometimes rose above 115 degrees, and the heat waves would actually last for several days. Research has found that the average temperatures in Melbourne are up to 9 degrees higher than in surrounding suburbs. As a result, on hotter days and hotter nights, it impacts our communities, especially the most vulnerable, impacts to their health, and this includes the elderly and, of course, the young. In 2009, the city of Melbourne actually experienced a 62% increase in heat-related mortality. During this time, temperatures were 22 to 31 degrees higher than typical in the state of Victoria. So by comparison, in January, typically in Melbourne, it's about 70 degrees, so about the same as the coastline here in Los Angeles. In January of 2009, they saw 3 consecutive days of temperatures exceeding 109 degrees. And the urban heat island, of course, exacerbated these heat waves. So to complicate things, at the same time as the extreme heat, they were in the middle of an extreme drought. Melbourne then put in water restrictions, of course, to deal with the drought in order to save water. But unfortunately, while these were very effective for water conservation, they had some unintended consequences. And I really want to focus on these to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes, although I do believe DWP is doing a great job so far. First off, they stopped watering their public lands, so they went dry and they turned brown. This resulted in a loss of cherished recreation, shade, ecosystem services. You obviously had a decrease in vegetation and shade. Kids could no longer play on athletic fields. They were basically benched inside, which had really, negative effects on the public psyche. And trees died in large numbers. And without these ecosystem services that trees provide through their leafy canopy and shade, the urban heat island intensified because you don't have that shade and evaporative cooling. And one thing I found really interesting is that when you get to that level of extreme heat, the city's infrastructure itself just begins to shut down. It can't keep up when everyone's running their air conditioner. At some point, your energy, you can't keep up with that capacity. And so what they found in hindsight, it was that the areas with our natural infrastructure, their robust urban canopy, which actually saved the most lives and kept people out of the hospital. So the City of Melbourne has now created, after the drought, an adaptation approach and plan. And I have to say I'm really, really pleased that this motion actually addresses quite a few elements of that. And I do think that is exciting, by the way. So they set a target to cool their city by 4 degrees Celsius, which is about 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Public researchers determined that the best way to protect lives in times of extreme heat is to ensure that everyone lives in a community with a dense urban canopy or urban forests. So Melbourne then set a goal to double its existing tree canopy from about 20% to 40%. That doesn't mean that ours will be 40% if we do that. That's what was appropriate for them. The plan also calls for keeping soil moisture levels high to help that evaporative cooling and cool the urban heat island effects. And also importantly, all new green spaces needed to be irrigated with recycled or stormwater harvesting type of water. They also had other strategies such as cool roofs and some of the things that the motion talks about here in terms of heat mapping, an analysis of their city with hot and cool spots. So what can Los Angeles and California learn for this? Well, first, while water restrictions were imperative to keep the city-wide scale of the drought, keep them on target, special attention has to be paid to keeping public spaces green, even in a severe drought. 2, we can't have a one-size-fit-all approach to drought-induced restrictions. We really need to think carefully through them. 3, a robust urban forest can save lives. Tree People believes that the city of Los Angeles really needs to reprioritize the importance of our urban forests, and I acknowledge you have been making great progress in that recently, but believe it needs to be taken further. When you think about it, our urban forest is our first and best defense against extreme heat, in addition to all the other multiple benefits it provides. And lastly, local water projects should be built to help protect this critical green infrastructure without having to import more water from distant sources. So that's just a quick update from Australia, and if you want more information, our full report on Lessons from Australia is up on our website, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Bloom. A couple of questions for you. One of the things that, lots of things that struck me on that trip were very, very informative. Walking with Lord Mayor Robert Doyle, not just his expertise on what type of trees were out there, but the ability for them to set this target and then dispatch trees as a resource layered with wind patterns to cool the city. I mean, they really have gotten pretty close to the target that they set out to do, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. They're going to reduce the heat signature of a city by 7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty wild.
It's amazing.
One of the other things that was really fascinating, and it was one of those sort of moments where I realized, gosh, it makes so much sense. The loss of evapotranspiration made it so that pressurized water systems moved around a lot more, and they were having more breaks in their system because of the dryness. So in some ways, one of the lessons learned were that you had to make sure that you maintained a certain amount of sort of green everywhere so that you didn't degrade the system more. So it was very interesting. But the question is, they managed to do something with their governance structures to move quickly. What is it that they did, and how can we do that here?
It's a great question. What they did is they took a whole of water cycle approach. So basically, they were in a dire situation. They knew it wasn't a question of if they were going to run out of water, it was just when. So granted, they have a slightly different structure than we do here with a little less bureaucracy, let's say, but they still were able to bring in every single relevant agency. It was called the Office of Living Victoria at the time, which has now been subsumed by another department, but the concept still holds, where if you work on transportation, housing, streets, environment, water, anything that touches water, they were in a real-time situation where they had a key deputy working on this issue at all times. So the planning was done in an integrated manner, and unfortunately the silos that sometimes get in the way of city and other levels of planning here were decreased. They didn't go away completely, of course, but it was significantly decreased. So what can we do here? I think there's efforts underway with One Water and others. I think the Mayor's Water Cabinet is a great improvement. Right now, Tree People is working on the Greater LA Water Collaborative as a pilot with the LA County Flood Control District, LADWP, and the Bureau of Sanitation to actually look at breaking down these silos. And we're going to have a report that'll detail this later this year. But, I would just recommend that the more that even this committee can have the other committees, when you have a similar topic, get together and really workshop the key issues instead of your siloed committees even in one area, that would be very helpful.
The term of art that they use that is ingrained in my brain is they moved to a networked governance system, which I think is so appropriate when you think about sort of water, because it is really a network of systems that need to work in tandem or need to work together. And what didn't necessarily was the governmental structures around water, which I think is some of the predicaments that we have here. Recently just to share with you sort of how impactful the trip was, when I had a chance to be interviewed by the consultants that worked on our integrated economic analysis IEA report for the utility, I suggested very strongly that Los Angeles should start considering to put all water under one shop. Now that's controversial because you've got many departments, the utility, sanitation, a lot of different peoples who touch water, but if we had, I think we can go of it one of two ways: a network governance system that actually is functioning, or just have one department that oversees every molecule in the city. And I think only then will we realize what it is that we need to make sure that this very scarce resource is more precious in our policy and appropriation minds than it is today. So thank you so much for being here. Please don't go anywhere, colleagues. Any questions for Ms. Bloom from Tree People? Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and it was great sitting with you a couple of months back in my office, and it's great to work with Tree People. Long-standing relationship, and I love the mission of your organization.
Thank you.
And Mr. Fuentes, I want to congratulate you for the leadership on this. I love this motion so much so that I highlighted several parts of it. It's great that the City of Melbourne, Australia, has a goal of actually decreasing their temperature. Now that's a goal worth going for, and I love the implications of that. And one thing that discussions about water dominate every conversation in every neighborhood when you're talking about planning, land use, development, management, et cetera. It's all about water. And I think our current drought situation underscores that. And I think that by and large, people are getting used to the idea that we're going to have to, that's the new normal, that we're going to have to really design our lives around water scarcity for forever moving forward. To that end, you mentioned the silos and alluded to greater collaboration and cooperation, et cetera. One glaring deficiency that we have in the City of Los Angeles, and I've made it really clear, and something we're working on over in the Public Works Committee, and that is we we talk about 1 million trees and planting trees in our urban canopy, and then we proceed to do nothing really to maintain, manage, enforce, and take care of adequately. And so I'm working really hard to make sure that our own city departments and bureaus understand that the importance of the urban canopy. And so we're taking a look at increasing the fines for illegally removing trees or damaging them beyond repair. One simple act of removing or trimming trees for whatever reason that in a non-permitted way in an area that is a gathering place for people in a public area can go from having a lovely quality of life to having no quality of life overnight when the canopies are removed. So part of what I'm saying is we just need to get in on the act in the city, and if we're really going to value our urban canopy and grow it and then maintain it, then we need to devote adequate resources to do just that, and enforcement tools for when trees are illegally removed or trimmed or butchered. And part of it is education. So question for you is, in Australia, did you glean from their example how the public how were they made receptive to this? Necessity is the mother of invention, so they had to get in the game, they had no choice. But what was the level of resistance for these drastic measures that had to be taken in Australia, and how has that evolved over time?
Right. It's a great question, and actually, this is something else that we focus on in this report and that we saw in our delegation trip. I have to say that, especially in Melbourne, where we were in the state of Victoria, they did an amazing job of communicating with the public outreach. And they did it in different ways. So you didn't just have one stream of communication, public meetings, let's say, not that there's anything wrong with public meetings, but they did, they spoke to them about the need about heat and water on TV. They talked to the daily radio or news reporters, and instead of saying, it's a beautiful sunny day, they would say, we're in trouble, folks. Our water levels are here. They had billboards out with very visceral reaction, pictures that created a visceral reaction of dam levels. They had incentives for homeowners and business members to have tanks in your home, to plumb that water indoors. They had incentives. I know we had a turf rebate here, but instead of just having a turf rebate, they incentivized putting in climate-appropriate plants, and then you had the further incentive of watering those plants with rain that you captured. So the public, I have to say, they were very receptive, and in fact, they would have communities try to outdo each other. They were so into it. It was a badge of honor. One other thing that they did, I will say, that was very effective is they set an actual target. So instead of, let's say, reducing your water usage in the city of LA by 25%, or even for a person 25%, they said you are responsible for hitting 40 gallons per person per day, the equivalent. And right now we're up at, 85 or something like that? I'm looking at my DWP folks over there. And it was a badge of honor for them to get down to that level. So they took it as a challenge.
Wonderful. Well, our chair is lowering the average just individually. And so it was Lord Mayor, you mentioned?
Lord Mayor Robert Doyle.
Lord Mayor Robert Doyle. So if we're able to do this, I will refer to Mr. Fuentes as Lord Council Member Felipe Fuentes if we achieve this goal. But no, really, really good stuff. And I think we need an all-in approach. And I think we should just totally set this as our goal and make that the goal for the city, all agencies, all departments, and then we respond accordingly to how to achieve that. And that means making some tough decisions. But I think Angelenos would support that, given the circumstances that we're in. So thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell, I'm happy to second your motion. Mr. Perez?
Thank you. Couple of things. One, I'm concerned to find that the best part of the solution is tree canopy, because the city of Los Angeles for the next 20 or 30 years is going to be spending tens of millions of dollars a year fixing sidewalks and removing some number of trees as part of that effort. So how do we not cook ourselves as part of that and make things worse rather than better?
Thank you so much for raising that, because this is an issue of great importance to tree people and to the city. It's our belief that the sidewalk settlement and the Willett settlement should, that whatever funding, the $30 million a year used for repairing sidewalks, that should leverage other sources of funding from other departments to be actually ensuring that we contribute to our urban forests, and we're not taking out trees, and when we do, we are replacing them at an appropriate level, and that we're putting in, whenever you touch that sidewalk to replace it, you're putting in appropriate green infrastructure, curb cuts, tree wells, whatever it is, to keep the trees that are going in there healthy and to make sure they're large enough spaces to have the mature, robust trees that you need to actually provide the protection. So we share the concern that this sidewalk program may decrease trees, and we're really hoping that, I know the Urban Forestry Division is looking at some sort of sustainability plan for trees. I don't know that.
We're doing a whole inventory, yeah.
Yes, all the inventories, but also a long-term plan and policies. And I urge you all to really pay attention to this. We're here to work with you on it. This is the time to make sure that our infrastructure, our tree infrastructure, is here to help Angelenos for the next centuries.
Well, and I appreciate that, although I'm a little concerned that even if we keep up the numbers, that if you pull out a 50-year-old ficus that's totally ruined the sidewalk and you replace it with one of our little stick trees, that in a 20-year period or so, that will certainly heat things up before that canopy starts to catch up. So, and I don't think we have any ability to replace all those mature trees with other giant mature trees. So
Well,
how do we
agreed,
deal with that piece
Sorry.
of the issue?
It's not the only mechanism, certainly, and I think that this motion gets at other strategies, cool roofs. There's a lot of other strategies for reducing the urban heat island effect. And it's not only trees. And talked about the evaporative cooling. You need soil. You need moist soil. So what that does is allow the evaporation from precipitation that has come to cool the little microclimate around it. So even if you don't have a tree there, if you have open space with moist soil, so meaning no sidewalk, no asphalt, and actually creating some open space, you're still helping reduce the urban heat island effect.
And that's another question I had. How do we keep soil moist when we're not getting very much rain? We obviously don't want to use the water that we have on moistening soil, because that
Right.
sort of misses the point too.
Right, well, agreed. We don't want to be using imported water to do that. Tree People advocates for using local water sources, so where possible to use recycled water. In Australia, they had great examples outside of, for example, their cricket stadium, sort of the equivalent of maybe outside of Dodger Stadium here. They tapped into their sewer mine and created a mini recycled water plant, and they used that water, and it was underground. You couldn't even see it, you couldn't smell it. It was amazing, and they would use that water to irrigate those fields, which were for recreation, so they were grass or turf, but also stormwater harvesting. And the common perception here is that it doesn't rain, but even in the driest year on record, in 2013, it rained 3.5 inches, and if we would have captured that water, that would have been 3,500 gallons for every Angeleno. So there is enough if we actually build the infrastructure to capture it.
And one last question. So they had 109-degree days, obviously, despite their best efforts. What did they do to protect senior citizens and very young children? And it's obviously going to be a relevant issue for us this summer, as there's some folks that think we may have 2 or 3 weeks of blackouts.
They had a multi-pronged strategy, including creating opening centers for the public, government centers. They created cooling corridors, and that's actually part of their plan now. They didn't have this all in place at the time, unfortunately, but they're creating corridors, so if people can't get in cars for whatever reason, they can walk if they need to under shade to the place that they need to go to be cool. So it's an interesting concept. I think it's perhaps mentioned in this motion. Other than that, I'm not an expert on everything else they did for that, so I can't speak to it.
Thank you.
Very good. Colleagues, Mr. Blumenfield.
Just a quick comment. Great questions all around. Love the work the tree people does, and this is a great report. Just wanted to observe there was a similarity we've been doing in the LA-Israel task force when we're looking at some water and energy issues. We've noticed a lot of similarities, particularly the holistic approach is something that's being done in Australia, is being done in Israel, and some other countries that lead the way. But I think it's great when we can not try to always reinvent the wheel and learn from the rest of the world and take best practices. So obviously I fully support this item. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. Thank you,
Thank
Deborah
you.
Bloom, for being here. We do have the CAO's office, Bureau of Sanitation, and DWP. If you wanted to add anything very briefly, we'll take your comments. Anything to the report? Come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Marchese. I'm an Assistant Division Manager with the Regulatory Affairs Division at LA Sanitation. I'm here today to talk to this committee about reducing greenhouse gas emissions within the LA Sanitation. And thank you for this opportunity to talk
I think
about
we're still on item 2. I know that we're
excuse
still
me.
on item 2, yeah.
My mistake.
Yeah, no worries.
I was sitting there for like an hour and a half. I guess I was ready to go. I apologize.
And I was just about to ask you what other department we should include in item 2, so go on and pick one and we'll...
Thank you.
All righty. All right, hearing and seeing no... Nancy, come on up. Nancy Sutley with the Department of Water and Power, also a fellow member of the delegation. Share with us some of your observations and things that DWP is doing now as a result of this amazing motion as testified to by Mr. O'Farrell.
Lord.
Well,
Lord.
thank you, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I think we recognize that these are issues that we have to deal with. And the motion refers to some work that was done by Professor Alex Hall looking at forecasting temperatures in Los Angeles in the future. This was work that was done on behalf of Department of Water and Power using Recovery Act money, I think trying to understand sort of impacts of climate change on Los Angeles. So we certainly know that this is an issue, and as you heard, I think we try to look 20 years into the future through the Integrated Resources Plan as well. I think, as you noted, and as Deborah noted, the need for departments to work together, and clearly on One Water and the Mayor's Water Cabinet, that's very helpful. And finally, DWP has supported tree planting now for at least a decade or more, recognizing the value that trees play in helping us to reduce our cooling needs by providing natural cooling to homes. So we'll continue to support that, and certainly saw in our trip to Australia how important the role of trees were both in the public spaces and also in people's homes. So.
Great. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your leadership and making sure that we realize all of the lessons learned in Australia. Mr. Blumenfield?
Just a quick comment from Ms. Sutley, which is happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Doug Walters, Acting Chief Sustainability Officer for Sanitation. I duly noted all the comments, and we, of course, support all the recommendations in the motion, and just wanted to remind everybody that we're very actively leading the effort, the citywide effort, which is turning into a regional-wide One Water plan, which takes into effect a lot of the things that Ms. Bloom talked about, and keeping the communities very involved in that multi-year effort and planning effort. So just wanted to remind you of that large effort.
Great. Ms. Sutley, Mr. Walters, thank you. Ms. Bloom, of course, thank you. Colleagues, let's go ahead and approve the motion. It says here as amended, but I don't know that, okay, we're making some amendments to instruct the CLA and the CAO in conjunction with the specified departments to report on the formation of a committee on cooling and urban heat impacts to establish a cooling target for the city and related matters. But before we vote on that, we're going to go ahead and take public comment from David Fink, and from Wayne. Come on up.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. David Fink. I'm the Director of Policy at Climate Resolve. We're big supporters of this motion. As we heard previously, heat is the greatest threat to public health in terms of weather. There are a greater number of mortalities attributed to heat than all other weather events combined in an average year. And so just to quickly, I wanted to address a couple of questions that Councilmember Koretz had. In terms of vulnerable populations, the County Department of Public Health has a pilot program. They're testing a social connectedness pilot program that in all sort of disaster events, or in this case an extreme heat event, that connects people and connects vulnerable populations with their neighbors, with their friends, and to make sure that they're checked on and they're doing okay. And just to echo what Deborah said, there are a number of, it's not just about the urban tree canopy, it's also other types of surfaces. So surfaces that are highly reflective, obviously are much cooler. Black asphalt on a very hot day can get up to 150 or 160 degrees. So it's a combination of solutions that can help us achieve this cooling target.
Great. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Fink. Mr. Spindler?
Yes, there's a man from George Brandis. Who's he? Well, he's the Attorney General of the fucking Australian government. And he says he's questioning the science of climate change. He's not at all convinced that it's settled. Labour has seized on comments by Senator Turnbull's government minister that there were a number of views at the cause of the climate change, arguing it proves the deep climate skepticism in the coalition. So in other words, they know down there in Australia this climate change crap is bullshit. That's the Attorney General right there today on the AA on April 19, 2016 out of Australia. Two days ago. There you go. So that just goes to show you that you're fucking with something that they know nothing about. It's a scam. It's all for the poverty pimps.
All right, so we'll go on to, we'll go ahead and approve that without any objection. Very good. It's deemed approved. Item number 3, Mr. Prieto.
Certainly, item number 3, reports from the CAO, DWP, Bureau of Sanitation, in response to motion, Koretz, Bond, and Blumenfield, O'Farrell, relative to reducing carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions.
Very good. Welcome back, Mr. Webster, Mr. Hirano. And Bureau, there we go.
I'm back.
All right. Item number 3.
Go ahead.
So most of my comments were part of the presentation on the integrated resource plan, and so I'll turn it over to Bureau of Sanitation, but I'm here to answer questions as we get into that part.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So LA Sanitation is committed to reducing greenhouse gases. We've long held the primary responsibility for collecting, cleaning, and recycling solid and liquid waste generated by residential, commercial, and industrial customers in the city. In executing these responsibilities, LA San generates greenhouse gases and is taking action to reduce these emissions in the region by 2050. In 2015, we adopted a strategic plan that sets high goals for our utility, which build upon an overarching program of environmental sustainability and result in these emission reductions. These efforts include development of a sustainable local water supply, which will reduce the demand for imported water and the embedded energy in water conveyance, the deployment of clean trucks and vehicles, and the reduction of miles traveled to reduce air pollution and congestion, implementation of renewable energy projects to reduce the demand for fossil fuel energy, increase the rate of recycling solid resources to conserve resources, reduce GHG emissions, and improve sustainability, and reduce, reuse, and recycle more solid and organic waste to reduce the quantity of methane from material in decay, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. Specific actions using these key strategies include developing the local water supply by reusing and capturing more wastewater and stormwater, We continue to recycle water for reuse and have plans to significantly increase that production to augment local water supply, reducing costs and carbon emissions related to import and conveyance of water. These projects include the Terminal Island Advanced Water Treatment Purification Facility, which will upgrade the facility to produce 10,000 acre-feet annually, the Donald C. Tillman Advanced Water Purification Facility project, which will add an additional 30,000 acre-feet per year of recycled water for groundwater replenishment. We continue to deploy more clean trucks, cars, and infrastructure, including zero-emission electric. We advance our clean fuel program to operate one of the largest municipal clean fleet solid resources collection fleets in the country with more than 700 heavy-duty vehicles. LA San has a goal to convert to 100% of our solid resources collection fleet to clean fuel next year. Additionally, we continue to add more electric vehicles and have plans underway with General Services Department to install in-plant electrical vehicle charging stations. We use smart logistics to decrease the vehicle miles traveled and trips on these collection trucks, and this also reduces roadway congestion. We continue to implement more renewable energy projects to replace fossil fuel. We're completing the construction of the digester gas utilization project at Hyperion. This is a renewable energy bio-to-gas project that will make this facility self-sufficient and self-sustaining in energy. The environmental and economic benefits of using renewable bioenergy include generating electrical energy that produces no greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels, transforms a waste product into a renewable resource, reduces the amount of purchased electricity, reduces the demand on the electrical grid, and provides our facilities with the ability to continue operation in the event of local and regional power outages. And our last strategy is to reduce, reuse, and recycle more solid and organic waste. Reducing the quantity of waste that is generated in the city will cut methane generation associated with decay. We currently reuse and sequester this material in composting and soil augmentation. We have plans to utilize more of this material to produce more biogas for more renewable energy production. We also are transitioning the new waste and recycling system for businesses and large apartment complexes in the city. This franchise hauler program is called Zero Waste LA. It's designed to increase the amount of material recycled, reduce street impacts, reduce air pollution, and provide customer service and fair customer rates. And that concludes my notes on greenhouse gas reduction.
Very good. CAO?
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Stephen Delhara. I'm with the Office of the CAO. Before you is a report regarding the financial implications of worst-case climate change here in LA. On June 27, 2014, we requested to report on the potential financial impacts of the worst-case climate change scenarios to the city. And since this is not something that the office has sufficient expertise to do, at the request of Councilmember Koretz, we reviewed 7 select reports that analyzed climate change specifically in the city. And they are as follows. A joint report by the city, UCLA, and the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action, Mid and End of Century Warming from 2012, an EPA report, Climate Change in the U.S. from 2015, Governor Brown's Executive Order B-3015 from 2015, a report from the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action, a report from the California Department of Public Health entitled Prepping California for Extreme Heat, Guide and Recommendations from 2013, a report from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power entitled Urban Water Management Plan from 2010, and last but not least, Mayor Eric Garcetti's Sustainability Plan from 2015. So in order to predict the impact of climate change, we were focused on 6 major subsections of this really vast issue, which are extreme heat, water resources, air pollution, electricity supply, health, and coastal impact. Overall, the research concludes that inevitably Los Angeles is going to face a warmer future, and that future will be based based solely on really the actions that are taken to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And in terms of the financial implications to the city, well, there were just too many variables to really define an exact value. And that's why we decided that if you wish to pursue this further, we recommend contracting economic consultants from the Office of Economic Analysis to efficiently do an analysis, subject to funding being made available. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Del Haro. Mr. Harano, would you like to add anything? No. Very good. Thank you. Colleagues, questions? Mr. Kretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for hearing this item today. It's particularly timely as based on the things that are going on in Houston. For those of you who aren't aware, in the past 48 hours, they've received around 20 inches of rain. 7 people have died, and emergency crews have pulled around 1,200 people out of the water in high water rescues. So it points out to us again that climate change is no joke, and what we thought was off in the decades, off in the distant future, is happening right now. And our drought has been so exacerbated by decades of warming trend in the high Sierras that it's essentially become a new normal. I want to thank each department's staff for responding to this motion. I don't think I've ever asked for as many reports with one motion as in this case. I also want to thank the mayor's sustainability team and credit them for a great sustainability plan, which is providing a lot of leadership, and also the neighborhood councils and a number of NGOs that weighed in and support. I also want to thank Councilmember Blumenfield for his suggestion in his committee that we sweep this under the governor's executive orders, which I think is a decent idea, although I think we should also, as a city, see if we can exceed those targets. And I know the IRP actually has us setting some of that as a goal to actually exceed it. Just a couple of questions. One, the CAO recognized that you don't have the expertise to do all the financial studies. So I would certainly move that we allow them to hire a financial expert to do these studies, which are absolutely critical. Also, I'd like to see for sanitation that we include something from the council file from the Neighborhood Council Alliance, which is launching a pilot initiative called Cool Blocks, where they've identified 10 residential neighborhoods and are working to have those neighborhoods go carbon neutral by 2025. Also, our Sister Cities group wants to exchange best practices on climate issues, including our goals, with all of our sister cities. So hopefully we can find a way to do that as well. I know our clean fuel program has a lot of trucks that use natural gas. And while it's a cleaner fuel program, I think we've seen from Aliso Canyon the problems of being dependent on natural gas. And I hope that we will move to getting our heavy trucks on electric sooner rather than later. Do we know what the current timetable is to do that, and when we're hoping to electrify our trucks?
Thank you for those recommendations and suggestions. The electric pilot program is underway. We're currently proof of concept and demonstration on those vehicles. We have quite a bit of testing to do in the local environment, and then we'll come back with some timetables on full implementation.
Very good. I thank everybody for all their great work on this, and we've got to move as expeditiously as possible. And especially, I would point out that after the Paris conference on climate change in December, where everyone agreed that we needed to limit global warming to 1.5 Celsius degrees, and that hopefully in the next 10 or 20 years we'd be able to keep under that number. We already hit that in February. So we are running out of time to act quickly, and hopefully LA can be one of the leaders in that regard.
Colleagues, any additional comments or questions? Very good. Let's go ahead to public comment. Alexandra Nagy, Wayne, Liza White.
Good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Nagy. I'm the senior SoCal organizer with Food and Water Watch. I think this is appropriate timing, consider it's Earth Week this week. I wish it wouldn't take 2 years to get here, but it's an ongoing process, and I support doing more, giving more finances to do more studies. I just wanted to talk about the Paris talks and what we agreed upon there. We're already at 1 degrees of warming, and the scientific limit has been said we can only do 0.5 more degrees of warming to prevent major tipping points and feedback loops. In 2014, the IPCC said we need to, basically we can only emit an additional 400 gigatons of carbon dioxide beginning in 2011, and from 2011 to 2015 we emitted about 180 of that. So we really only have about 220 gigatons left, and if you look at getting emissions to zero, which is where we really need to go, we need to reduce those 17% every year until we get to zero, and that would get us there by 2035. So really looking at a transition to 100% renewables, keeping fossil fuels in the ground, and limiting our carbon budget by 2035 is what we should be shooting for.
Great, thank you. Ms. White?
Thank you. Liza White from the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles, here to talk to the motion 0907, which was brought to this committee in 2014. Thanks for bringing all of these motions for consideration in the coordinated way that you have today. Climate Action Plan is the heart of the motion of 0907 as far as we are concerned. We need a government structure to serve as an umbrella for coordination and prioritization for the city. The current laudable and inclusive Office of Sustainability Plan is rightfully much broader than providing goals and implementation for carbon reduction specifically. In 2008, the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles partnered to write a proposition and support passage of reforms that in part increase the number of terms of the City Council members so that City Council members would have the long-term experience and perspective to take on not just their district concerns but larger citywide issues so that they could develop expertise and interest in the citywide issues. This is one of those issues. We support the passage of this motion to create a climate action plan. We would further support embedding such a climate action plan in the city's general plan to assert the city's commitment to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. Mr. Spindler?
Yes. We have, well, this is more of the same thing, isn't it?
Climate change.
It's gonna raise 5 degrees. It's not gonna do anything of the kind. Weather is cyclical. It always has been. You cannot predict these patterns. But you were so in love with natural gas-powered vehicles. What happened? What happened to your love of natural gas-powered vehicles? Oh, Aliso fucking Canyon happened. Oops. I guess it was leaking. Natural gas, when you store it and fuck up the way it's stored, I guess it can kill people, right? I thought you guys wanted to go natural gas. Like over in Alameda, we had a little natural gas fill-up station. You guys, you're incredible. You'll never stop fucking this up, man.
Felicia Bander, Ann Rushton, and Adam Lane.
Hello, my name is Felicia Bander. I'm here in support of the motion to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% from 1990 levels. Climate change is our greatest threat ever. We have to stop using fossil fuels. Scientists tell us we have between 5 and 15 years for the world to transition completely away from fossil fuels. And it's a wonderful opportunity that technology will now allow us to capture the power of the sun and wind. The world is coming together on this global problem. We need to make LA committed to thriving as a sustainable, clean energy city of the future. We need to put rooftop solar on every available home and building in the city. We need to train our workforce to assess buildings to be more energy efficient. We need to take the challenge posed by global warming to make LA's economy strong and vibrant and employ our workforce in renewable energy. Let's show the world how it can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Ann Rushton. I'm also with the League of Women Voters in the Climate Committee. And we, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you also for taking on the Heat Island thing and saving our trees in LA, very important. But also that's so closely tied in with climate change that we want to make sure that we're eliminating the real root cause of climate change as much as possible. And, you know, the heat island effect is really important too, but we need to go far beyond that. And I think it's great to bring all these things in together, the IRP, the heat island, and also reducing greenhouse gases. And also there's now a motion to reevaluate community plans and the elements of the general plan. And I think that's a very important tie-in that we should be looking at having a climate action plan and putting it into our general plan so that we know that it's going to be observed by all of the new projects going in the city.
Mr. Lane?
Good afternoon, council members. First, I'd like to thank you for scheduling this item today. I'm here to talk on behalf of the Los Angeles Business Council in support of setting an emissions reduction target of 80% below 1990 levels. While this target seems stringent, we know that it's the scientifically accepted minimum necessary to mitigate the most dangerous impacts of climate change. Even more so, we're glad to have seen the reports back and that the various departments believe there is a feasible pathway to reaching these targets. A number of cities, including San Fran, Boston, New York, Chicago, and Toronto, have all made the same pledge. And it's time that Los Angeles should strive to be a leader in this area, as it has been with so many other environmental initiatives. For Los Angeles, the transition might be costly, but we know that increased energy efficiency and clean energy will be monumental to emissions reduction, job creation, and economic development in various communities that need it the most. It also allows for engagement and empowerment in communities and for the coordination of our city agencies, which are so often siloed. As such, we're pleased to offer our strong support for this motion. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you. There's no additional public comment on the item, colleagues. My recommendation is that we at first thank Mr. Blumenfield for having heard this in his Innovation, Grants, Technology, Commerce, and Trade Committee on December 1st of 2015, and that we concur with the action of the committee. Note and file all the reports and instruct all city departments, including the proprietaries, to develop plans to meet the targets in Governor Brown's Executive Order B30-15 and Executive Order S-305. The analysis should include short, medium, and long-term solutions, the cost of implementation, and reductions in all three classifications of emission sources. Mr. Blumenfield? I'm sorry, Mr. Kretz?
I just wanted to add an amendment that we allow the CAO to hire a financial expert to review the financial impacts of
Mr.
climate
Kretz,
change.
I think that would be a better motion that is heard by Budget and Finance. This committee really doesn't do appropriations. So as a member of the committee, I'd suggest that you recommend through motion to Budget and Finance to do that. I don't want to
That's true. That could just as easily be done. And we have a couple members of Budget Committee here.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and do that. Hearing no objection, that shall be the order. Item number 4. Mr. Prieto?
Number 4, motion Krikorian, Bond, and Wesson, relative to Department of Water and Power reporting on research partnership relative to determining investments to be made to achieve 100% RPS.
Mr. Webster, good to see you again.
And so my comments were summarized on this slide that I showed you in the Integrated Resource Plan presentation. So I'll just leave it up there and address your questions, comments, and concerns.
Very good. Colleagues, comments, questions, or concerns for Mr. Webster? Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, a couple. Have we looked into working with the Rocky Mountain Institute on these issues? Because I know we've worked with them in the past, and they've been working on this for several decades and could be very helpful.
So we will look into that. We don't have any initiatives at the moment, but we will look at the research that they're doing.
And I'm glad to see this moving forward, and I appreciate Mr. Krikorian's leadership on this. We've been named the top solar city in the country 3 years running, which is great, but We can't rest on our laurels while other cities around the state and the nation are stepping up in some other big ways. San Diego announced a goal of 100% renewables by 2035. The mayor of San Diego has been saying he wants to take LA's #1 solar city title, so we hopefully will keep up with that. And San Jose is committed to 100% renewables by 2022. So hopefully we can keep moving in that direction as well.
Colleagues, any additional comments? Mr. Blumenfield?
Just a comment. I mean, we talked a lot about the issues earlier, but I'm a big believer the holy grail for this is storage, and how we get to that is going to be key, and we've talked about that as well, but it'll be a mix of large scale and small scale, and using new technologies to do it. So.
And, I think we're going to find exactly what happened in the solar industry, where we see that battery storage goes half the cost over the next couple of years. It'll half again, and it'll half again as it gets deployed, and we actually figure out how to best to use battery technology. So we are going to see tremendous improvements in technology, just like we did with solar and other renewable technologies.
Very good. Let's go ahead and move to public comment. Mr. Spindler, Dr. Leah Garland, Ms. Bander, Felicia Bander. Go ahead and please begin.
This motion lightens my heart. It's encouraging to me that my city is going in the right direction. I'm proud that my city is taking the steps to do its part in the fight against global warming. Here in LA, we're feeling the effects. We'll continue to feel them much more greatly. The heat, drought, the insecurity of our water supply, wildfires, sea level rising. Our ports will be inundated. It's a huge problem. Because of the threat of climate change, the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy is inevitable. And the sooner that LA embraces this reality and commits its resources 100% to the transition, the better for everyone. If we embrace the reality of climate change and commit to transitioning to renewable energy, we can ride the wave instead of being smashed by it. We can bring LA into a new, bright future, powered by sun and wind, providing clean energy jobs, and supported by a vibrant, thriving local economy. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, council members, for bringing this motion forward. I urge you to move LA to 100% renewables by 2035, like San Diego has. San Francisco just unanimously passed a city ordinance requiring new buildings to have solar panels installed on the roofs. It's a step forward for San Francisco's goal of meeting the city's electrical demands with 100% renewable energy. Since our Mayor Garcetti announced that at the U.S. Chinese subnational leaders would be making new climate commitments and agreements at the U.S.-China Climate Summit Climate Leaders Summit in September of 2015, Garcetti said that cities are the primary source of all greenhouse gas emissions and are on the front lines of battling the extreme weather caused by climate change. Mayors should lead the way to find solutions for reducing pollution. And I hope that we support our mayor and his promise that he made in Paris. And briefly, natural gas is a problem. If you take a look at the geophysical research letters, the Harvard researchers concluded that that the amount of methane that has been released in the U.S. has increased 30% from 2002 to 2014, and the reason is that it traps heat in the atmosphere much more efficiently than carbon dioxide.
Thank you, Dr. Garland. Mr. Spindler?
So there we go. Natural gas. I could have told you that when you started powering all of those fleets up. Should have went to solar. You love your natural gas. Coal was the enemy. Natural gas was our savior. Until people started fucking finding out the leaks. You never regulated it. Now you're going to have partnerships to do what? Force people to spend more money on crap like solar panel technology that has not evolved yet. We're getting there. Let the private sector evolve the technology. They're going to have roofing tiles, roughly 15% of what it costs now or more, that will have it embedded in them. People will be putting this crap on their roofs, but they're not going to do it tomorrow. Mandate it and give people tax credits in their pockets to do it. That's the way.
Graciela Geyer, Ms. Nagy, I think you also wanted to speak on this item, and Adam Lane.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So good afternoon. My name is Graciela Geyer. I am the new campaign representative for the My Generation campaign of the Sierra Club, which is our climate justice and clean energy campaign here in Los Angeles. And, statewide, we are the ones, I mean, not to take too much credit, but in San Diego it happened because of the Sierra Club. And that is a private utility. And here in Los Angeles, we have the opportunity to really invest the public and leaders like yourselves in really leveraging this opportunity, which is a really huge opportunity to make investments and, from my perspective, reparations to the frontline communities that our society and our government has really sacrificed to the fossil fuel economy. So this is a really incredible moment and shift in spite and in midst of all of the crises that we know that we are facing. So I'm just here to say that the Sierra Club really, we believe that el camino se hace al andar, which is we make the road by walking. So even though we have these challenges, we are going to be here with you just like we made the road for us to get off of coal, to get the city to commit to get off of coal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hello again. The Los Angeles Business Council is very excited about this potential development of a research partnership between LADWP, the regional universities, and other stakeholders. We've worked with UCLA's Luskin Center and USC's Program for Regional Environmental Equity on expanding DWP's renewable programs, specifically for solar. So we really understand how important this research is to discovering the economic, environmental, and social impact of reaching 100% renewables. To date, the city and LADWP have made great efforts, but we must now look to a greater goal of 1,000% renewable energy if we truly want to reduce the harmful impacts of climate change. Not only will achieving this goal reduce GHG emissions, but it's going to promote programs such as local solar that reduce disproportionate health impacts on disadvantaged communities. It's going to help lower energy bill costs, create career ladders in renewables, and promote local businesses. We greatly appreciate your support to begin this process, and we look forward to working with Council and other stakeholders. Thank you.
Hello again, Alexandra Nagy, Food and Water Watch. As you may know, we've been working on the Elisa Canyon blowout. There are still 14,000 residents displaced from their homes at this point in time. It is still not safe to go back home. Residents who try to go home are getting sick. And the science that has come out from Cornell University shows that natural gas or fracked gas is actually worse for the climate than coal because of the methane that leaks from blowouts or from our pipelines or from the fracking wellheads themselves. And so I'm really excited about our city talking about 100% because the residents who have been impacted by this disaster immediately understand that in order to shut down that facility, our city needs to make strong commitments to get to 100%. And so while we're doing the rally cry for shut it all down, we're also saying 100% right now. And so we support this process. We look forward to being involved. We hope that Porter Ranch residents and impacted residents could be a part of that community stakeholder group. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good, colleagues. We'll go ahead and approve the motion requesting the utility to develop, implement a research partnership with appropriate entities to determine what investments should be made to achieve a 100% RPS for the DWP. Hearing and seeing no objection, that shall be the order. That takes us to general public comment. Mr. Spindler. Thanks.
So much wasted time. All these presentations. It's the same thing. DWP is a criminal organization. It's the 11,000-pound gorilla in the room. Nobody pays attention. Where's my reform package for the DWP? When do we reform it? Never. The criminals over there, President Levine, I was over at his meeting, the last one before this week. I said, what about it? He fucking laughs because there are not going to be any changes. When are we going to take control of it? And when are we going to stop having them transfer $200+ million a year from our utility to this city council to waste on dumb shit? It's got to stop. The transfers have to stop. Stop the transfers of the money from the DWP to this rotten council.
We're adjourned. Thank you.